Thank you so much to everyone for coming back for the second session. We are recording the session and uh, we can now formally start. Please, over to you, ma'am.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much,
much,
Aparna,
Aparna,
and
and
thanks
thanks
everyone
everyone
for
for
um, participating in the
participating in the
morning
morning
session.
session.
Let's see
Let's see
what
what
Shivani has
Shivani has
promised. This
promised.
is
This
going to
is
be
going
a
to be a
more
more
fun
fun
session,
session,
which is
which
a
is a
really
really
tall
tall
order to
order to
follow
follow
after that
after that
wonderful
wonderful
workshop
workshop
that
that
she
she
did
did
with
with
you.
you.
But
But
the
the
good
good
thing
thing
is
is
that
that
I
I
think
think
Shivani has
Shivani has
done
done
half of
half
the
of the
work
work
that
that
I was
I was
planning to
planning to
planning.
planning.
She's
She's
already
already
built a
built a
very
very
solid
solid
foundation
foundation
on which
on
I
which I
can
can
now
now
start
start
building
building
upon
upon
as we
as we
talk
talk
about
about
voice,
voice,
right?
right?
And
And
I'm
I'm
glad
glad
that
that
the
the
question
question
came up
came up
already
already
a
a
few
few
times
times
in the
in the
first
first
session
session
and
and
was
was
also
also
addressed
addressed
in the
in the
first
first
session.
session.
So
So
in
in
that
that
sense,
sense,
Shivani, you've
Shivani,
made
you've
my
made my
job
job
much
much
easier.
easier.
Also,
Also,
we
we
both
both
discovered
discovered
yesterday when
yesterday
we
when we
were
were
discussing
discussing,
how we
how we
have
have
planned our
planned our
respective
respective
sessions. We
sessions. We
both
both
discovered that
discovered
we
that
are
we are
actually
actually
working with
working with
exactly the
exactly the
same
same
passages
passages
from
from
Das's
Das's
article.
article.
So,
So,
in a
in a
sense, I
sense, I
think it
think
will
it
be
will
very
be very
useful
useful
now to
now to
revisit,
revisit,
that
that
introductory
introductory
passages,
passages,
those
those
introductory
introductory
paragraphs
paragraphs
from
from
Das's
Das's
article,
article,
to
to
think
think
through
through
questions of
questions of
voice
voice
and
and
what
what
does
does
voice
voice
there
there
really
really
mean,
mean,
in
in
what
what
ways
ways
can we
can we
read
read
the
the
author's
author's
voice
voice
in
in
that,
that,
right?
right?
So,
So,
but
but
before we
before we
go
go
on
on
to
to
Das's
Das's
article, I
article,
do
I do
want to
want to
spend, I
spend, I
want us
want
to
us to
spend
spend
a
a
few
few
minutes
minutes
thinking
thinking
through.
through.
I
I
would
would
like to
like to
hear
hear
again from
again from
students, and
students,
I
and
know
I
a
know a
couple of
couple of
you
you
already
already
have
have
said
said
in those
in
many
those many
words that
words that
there's a
there is a
tremendous
tremendous
anxiety
anxiety
also,
also,
or there
or
is
there is
that
that
concern
concern
of
of
how does
how
the
does the
I
I
come
come
in
in
into our
into our
writing.
writing.
So
So
if we
if
can
we can
just go
just go
around the
around the
table,
table,
and
and
whoever is
whoever is
comfortable
comfortable
sharing,
sharing,
if you
if
can
you can
share
share
with
with
all of
all of
us,
us,
a what
what your
what your
what your
concerns
concerns
about
about
voice
voice
are,
are,
and
and
also if
also
you
if you
can
can
think
think
through,
through,
reflect
reflect
upon
upon
what
what
your
your
imagination, when
imagination,
you
when you
say
say,
how does
how
my
does my
voice
voice
come
come
in,
in?
what are
What
you
are you
actually
actually
imagining
imagining
your
your
voice to be?
voice to be?
What does
What
that
does that
voice
voice
really
really
mean to
mean to
you,
you,
or
or
what is
what
that
is that
voice
voice
constituted
constituted
of?
of?
So if
So
you
if you
can
can
reflect
reflect
upon
upon
that a
that a
little bit,
little
I
bit,
think
I
that
think
will
that will
be
be
a
a
useful
useful
place from
place from
where we
where
can
we can
then
then
kind of
kind of
jump
jump
on
on
to
to
the
the
text
text
and
and
see if
see if
some of
some
these
of
things
these things
can be
can be
addressed.
addressed.
I'm just
I'm
going to
just going to
switch on
switch
the
on the
fan.
fan.
So, but
So,
yeah,
but yeah,
I'm
I'm
listening to you,
listening to
so
you, so
keep
keep
talking.
talking.
And
And
anyone, I
anyone, I
mean,
mean,
any one of you
anyone
can
who can
share.
share,
Um,
um,
what does
what does
having a
having a
voice,
voice,
especially in the
especially in
context of
the context of
writing, mean
writing
to you?
mean?
Yes,
Yes,
Anna,
Anna,
I can
I
see
can
your
see your
hand go
hand go
up.
up.
Um,
Um,
Ma'am,
Ma'am,
as
as
hi,
hi,
Madhura, I'm
Madhura, I'm
Amanab.
Amanab.
Yeah.
Um, I
I
think
think
from
from
what,
what,
so if
if
like as
like
a
as a
research
research
person, so
person,
if
so
I'm
if
a
I'm a
researcher, if
researcher,
I'm
if I'm
writing
writing
a
a
research
research
article,
article, um,
so
so
my
my
voice I
voice
would
I would
define
define
as
as
something that
something
I
that
have
I have
inferred
inferred
by
by
reading
reading
some
some
material,
material,
and I
and I
want to
want
say
to say
something that
something
I've
that I've
gathered
gathered
from that
from that
material,
material,
Mm-hmm.
and the
and
kind
the
of
kind of
inference
inference
I've
I've
made
made
from
from
that
that
sort of
sort of
content.
content.
Right? If
Right?
I've
If
read
I've read
something and I
something and
want
I
to
want to
say
say
something,
something,
so for
so for
example,
example, as
I'm
I'm
working on
working on
popular
popular
culture in
culture in
Urdu.
Urdu.
So I
So
have
I
read a
have read a
bunch of
bunch of
popular
popular
magazines
magazines
through a
through a
couple of
couple of
decades,
decades,
and
and
I
I
have
have
an
an
idea is
idea
in
is
my
in my
head,
head,
and if I
and if
want
I
to
want to
voice that
voice that
idea, that
idea,
would
that
be
would be
my
my
idea, that
idea,
would
that
be
would be
my
my
voice.
voice.
And the
And the
anxiety, I
anxiety, I
think,
think,
most
most
importantly
importantly
comes from
comes
the
from the
fact
fact
that
that
I
I
can't
can't
possibly
possibly
read
read
everything that
everything
is
that is
there
there
on
on
popular
popular
culture in
culture
Urdu.
in
There
Urdu. There
might be
might be
some
some
perspective that
perspective
I
that I
have
have
missed
missed
out
out
on,
on,
or I
or I
have
have
interpreted
interpreted
in
in
it
it
in a
in a
way
way
where I
where
have
I have
missed
missed
out
out
some nuances. So, for example, like in Shivani ma'am's previous session, if someone is, if I'm talking about people who were reading literature earlier and now are, now have access to cinema, there will always be a class, like a section of public which will have access to neither. nor literature, neither literature nor cinema. So, so there is like a fear that somebody will just attack me, like with this thing that, oh, you have left this out, and how can you leave this out? So we are, I think, from a research perspective, it's a little scary to make a statement. And no matter how much evidence I provide, there's always like some loose end there. There's always like some gap, which I'm aware that there is. So one of my, and we see this happening in PhD vivas and all, the people jumping in on researchers like, you missed this out. So it's a little scary to sort of voice, to sort of really claim your voice. I think that's what I would like to
Okay,
say.
great. Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot, Anna, for also sharing very candidly the kind of anxieties that we all, I think, as researchers, whether you are on, as Shivani said, on that side of the PhD, or us who are on the other side of PhD. I think, but these are anxieties which we all as researchers and writers do harbor, right? Of what if my interpretation misses out on that? And that, I'm, you use these words, you said, like, what if somebody attacks me, right? Or no matter how much evidence, and I think it's very telling, right, that we are articulating it in this language precisely. Clearly there is something in the academic world which does make us really have that kind of fear, where we think of it in terms of an attack, right? And I don't think your word is misplaced in that sense, right? Clearly, academics clearly in terms of doing feedback are not kind, especially with PhD vivas, researchers. So I also hear where that is coming from, and hence what then that does to our concern with voice. Will my voice even matter, or will what I have to say even matter in that sense? Thank you. Thanks a lot. Anyone else wants to think about? Yes, Faizan.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
Uh, my concern is how can I, where is the distinctiveness in my voice? So
Hmm.
I'm more worried about that if I am engaging with multiple sources. So I'm drawing upon them. So where does my voice begin and where do their voices end? And so distinct, so to say, distinctiveness, where is my positioning in the argument, where I am where am I going forward, or I'm going just haywire with, I'm just doing for the sake of any argument. So what is, where is the distinctiveness in my voice whenever writing?
Right.
So
Right.
more often I also feel like uh, uh, am I really contributing something new, or so to say, real? I mean,
Hmm.
yes, in real terms. I mean, am I simply am I simply rehashing all those ideas, or
Hmm.
am I
Yes.
making any contribution in that
Okay.
sense?
Great. Yeah. Yeah, thank you again. Again, I think what you have articulated, Faizan, probably resonates with what a lot of, again, your peers, but also again a lot of all academics go through. Of, am I really saying something which is going to, which is anything new, or what you said, am I rehashing already existing ideas, right? Am I doing that? And again, the question of where is, what you said, where is the distinctiveness of my voice? Because there are many other voices that you are working with, there are multiple sources that you're working with. If I had to push you a little bit on that, just to reflect on, if I were to ask you to reflect on that very question of, what do you think might be the distinctiveness in your voice? Suppose you're working with 15 references, right? What do you think the distinctiveness of your voice will lie in? Right? When, so again, I'm pushing all of you also, and this is not just for Faizan, but when we say my voice, one thing that Anab said, and I wrote it down, she said my idea, right? So is that one something that constitutes your voice, your ideas? What else might your voice, is it a matter of style, for instance, that you have a peculiar style of writing? Is that voice, is that, is it perspective? Is it idea? So if we were to think of what constitutes voice, um, or what constitutes the distinctiveness, as you said, Faizan, what might that be? Again, just to
In that,
move a little further.
right, right. Uh, Thank you for the question, ma'am. I think it's combination of all these, and it is about how, I mean, each of everyone is different. So what I will pick from Das's essay will be different from what Anab will pick from Das's essay.
Yes.
In the very act of picking something from a particular essay makes us distinct. So in that
Yes.
way, and then how we organize, how we arrange those perspectives, how we compose, so to say, the entire thing. In that way, we end up being distinct. But
Absolutely.
right.
Okay, you've summarized my entire workshop. Yeah, but it is, you have hit it straight on, hit the nail on the head, really, that we need to also recast our imagination of a voice, right? Because I think many times what voice tends to sort of become only, like, singularly reference to, like, one's unique whatever standpoint, or style or way of writing. But there are actually several aspects to writing which constitute to your distinctiveness of, the distinctiveness of what you bring to the table, right? Again, if I can quickly go around, if there's someone else who wants to talk about what voice means to them, or what is this concern. You can even talk about your concerns of, of concern of how am I present in my text, or how should I be present in my text. Yes, Aparna.
Usually, when it comes to researching or maybe writing a chapter or a paper which is historically, I mean, something which we are borrowing a lot from the history. That is where, I mean, some of the things are stated when it comes to making opinions. Like, for example, we were talking about colonial India's audience making. That was a something that we can have an opinion of, but there are certain spaces or certain sections that directly borrow from history, and it's really difficult to actually sometimes it feels like you're just maybe just rewriting or paraphrasing what other people have written, maybe giving references, writing some quotes, but there is no actual your style or your presence in that kind of writing or a chapter or a section or whatever. So that is something that I think kind of became problematic for me when I was writing my MPhil dissertation. If it is something heavily borrowed from history, or if it is something very factual, that was something that I struggled with.
Right, right. Okay, so when it comes to, like, you're particularly referring to, when you say history, are you referring to archival material, or you're saying factual? Uh,
Factual, more
okay.
factual, as in not just limited to history, but if I'm
Yeah,
defining something, if I
yeah,
make, for suppose, I mean, I made this distinction between what is the definition of comic books and graphic novels, and a lot of people have given their own definitions. My take would be maybe taking one side or maybe adding just one small bit, but a lot of it was more about borrowing their ideas. So at one point of time in the middle of the chapter, I felt that am I just writing, or maybe what Faizan used in last session, recording what other people have said, or am I actually contributing in some way or the other? I mean, I also understand that the arrangement of those arguments already kind of made it my own, but still I
yeah.
felt that there could be more me in that kind of writing.
Right, right. Okay, so again, the word that came in, what you were saying was, you said my take on things, or Anab said my idea. Faizan said my distinctiveness, right? You also used at some point the word opinion. right? So I want to make a quick list of what are some of these things that we think constitute our voice, and hence which should come in our writing. Yeah. Okay, absolutely. So again, this is an important thing that you highlight of when you are giving definitions of several things. Once you put out the definitions out there, what are you really doing? And there's a lot. I will respond to this at some point in our workshop, but I do have a response to that, so we will come back to this. Anyone else? Even the question of I mean, that was raised in the earlier session, and I'm glad that some of you raised it. But what are your anxieties or just concerns, or you know what is the deal with use of I?
Somehow I don't find it puzzling for. I mean, I don't find it a problem, at least in my case, if I am not conventionally allowed to use I.
Right.
So I find it appropriate, and in a way, it also allows us to put ideas in focus rather than the the author. So since this is a conversation, and so it emphasizes more what is the conversation all about, and who all. Though it does not eliminate the author per se. It is author is there, but it's I somehow like this style where the argument itself gets foregrounded rather than the author.
Mhm. Okay. So you think the use of I might overshadow the argument at times, which is why if argument needs to be foregrounded, it's okay to sort of follow the convention of, um,
In
or
some,
am
I
I
mean,
misrepresenting what you're saying?
no. I mean, yes, you are right. In some forms, in genres of writing, I mean, for example, autoethnography. So in
Hmm.
that case, it is very much appropriate to use the I of the author.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
in different genres of writing, for example, in if I say the in our dissertation style of writing, I think it it goes well with me.
Okay, it goes well with you.
So if I say I am going to argue, the thesis argues this. So
Mhm.
I think I'm there, but in a different way I'm there. So
Okay, you're there in different ways. Okay, I'm just quickly reading what Vasundhara has typed in the chat box. So when I'm asking what your conception of voice is, Vasundhara says what one is trying to do or add to the existing argument. So in a way, what your contribution is to the existing discourse on of your area of research, right? Okay, great. So again, same thing. More, how am I really contributing in taking ahead the discourse? Aditi, you have your hand up.
Yes, I, sorry, I would just follow from what has already been discussed by Faizan and Aparna. Yes, there is this anxiety about my own contribution, as in if I am making a new point. But at the same time, for certain topics, for instance, I work with animal studies, and I had of late come across this idea of how something which I felt for a very long time, but I did not quite articulate it, or could not have I don't know, for some reason could not articulate it, but somebody had said something similar. At that point, there is this simultaneous feeling of, oh, I mean, my idea has already been taken away, like a feeling of being cheated. I mean, and at the same time, there's this feeling of, oh, okay, at least somebody has said this. So
Hmm.
there is this solace that somebody has participated in making my voice, and at the same time, that anxiety or that feeling of being cheated, that, oh no, somebody has already said this. So both of it kind of coexists in that discovery of my voice. So I mean, this is what I wanted to point out. In
Yeah.
many things, in many topics that we usually don't I mean, which are usually difficult to come across, or things that we have felt it in our bones for a very long time but not been able
Right.
to articulate.
Right. Thank you. Again, that was very beautifully put. Yeah, there are, like that utter horror at times that I think all of us, while doing our PhDs, have gone through, saying, somebody else has already done this. Why am I even doing this PhD? It's all been done, right? I think we all have gone through, though I have gone through that moment for sure. Uh, but what you bring to it is also the other thing of, oh, at least someone you're not alone in this. There's someone else who's also working or has worked on that topic. You might have something to fall back on, and so on and so forth. So I think that is a really a sort of beautiful way to look at it. Also, I think it's very relevant because what you are, and we will come back to this point of thinking of relationality while we are writing, but also of the act of research itself. So I think that I'll hold on to this point and we'll come back to it. Is there anyone else who wants to share or comment on
Yeah,
or
Madhura,
yes,
what
Shabir.
the point that I was raising earlier and spoke with Shivani again about it, but I just want to raise it again
Hmm.
that contrary to what Faizan was saying earlier,
Hmm.
that this, I mean, in Indian academia, it's absolutely a struggle and a fight to get the I in your process, in your thesis, in the lettered thesis,
Yes.
and the system, so to say, does not allow your I to come out of. Uh, it's as if that your voice does not matter equal to or does not match up to the status of other theorists or other people, other critics who have written on the same thing that you're writing about or composing that argument and collating that argument, and you're doing so much work for this, but you still don't get a right to your own thesis,
Hmm.
and it's taken away from you. So I quite feel that I mean,
Sure.
thankfully I've submitted my thesis, but and I did not push it so much in terms of a degree. But yes, this question keeps creeping back in that I could never use the word I. And I also mentioned earlier that it's so much conditioning that we, even when I speak, it's becoming one or we or
Yes.
as we speak or one knows.
Yes.
You speak like that. Your speech has become trained into that conditioning of not using you as a person
Yeah.
or you as an author, which
Yeah.
is which is actually who is making the argument. If the argument was so necessary, so is the author. Without the author, the argument might not come in. So that's something that I'm absolutely. This is, I mean, an overwhelming anxiety that one has. That why not me?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I hope, I mean, now that you've submitted your thesis, as Shivani said, once you're on the other side of PhD in the world of publishing, hopefully there will be journals where, of course, and there are, right, where the I is can be used unapologetically.
yeah,
In fact, might be also even desired.
yeah.
So hopefully that will set you on a journey. But I want to, if there aren't any other, okay, Faizan.
Yeah, what it also allows us to this if we use in third person perspective, right, without using I in first person, it also allows us to create a semblance of quasi objectivity.
Hmm. Yeah, and that is precisely what, though, I think one needs to,
Problematize.
one needs to question that, one needs to, or one also needs to place this in a larger historical context trajectory of also, and which is why I thought, this is like my cue to actually move to the next part, where I thought that generally what I do in these workshops is to take the participants straight to a text and get them to think of voice. But today I'm departing from that. We will come to Manishta Das's article in a bit, but I want to talk a little bit about the category of voice and what it has. There has been a lot of work that has been done on this category of voice, what it comes to represent in the larger universe of knowledge making, right? And this metaphorical, because when we are talking about writing, it is a metaphor of voice that we are really using, right? So I thought it would be good for us to just spend about 10 to 15 minutes in for me to outline these broad brush sort of trajectory of what voice has earlier considered, it has been considered to be, what has been this whole contested really history of the use of personal pronouns, so that we also can in some ways locate our anxieties and concerns along that established. You're not alone in really struggling, grappling with these questions, but these are larger disciplinary questions as well. Um, so I think, though, if I can say, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the centrality, or this need that we all feel for having our voice represented or being present in the act of writing is also because it has been aligned in very important ways with discourses of personal agency, with authorship, right? This metaphorical idea of voice. Though again, to historicize this, voice can be traced back to its larger sort of Euro-modernist roots, right, where the voice becomes the guarantor, it becomes the indicator, index, right, of the presence of the self and the presence of truth, right? The idea that the voice will express self and identity. And that agency consists in having a voice. So we also have like the metaphor being used very often, right? Voice, giving voice to the voiceless, voices of the marginalized, finding your own voice, and so on and so forth. And for a good reason, because of this very strong alignment of voice with ideas of agency, identity, this the struggle to make yourself heard and be understood. So really, voice in that trajectory of Euro modernity has been sort of representative of the self slash will, rationality, agency, right? Even in there has been a lot of work that has been done in what is called writing composition studies, largely in North America, but which is one sort of discipline which looks at academic writing, looks at students writing. And within composition and academic writing as well, there has been work on student voice or author's voice in pedagogy as well, which also tends to again sort of align with these ideas of the student's voice is kind of representative of students' individual consciousness, right? Now, now that there is this historical alignment of voice, which is why also voice has a certain power, has a certain valence for us, has certain concerns for us, that we want to be heard, we want our voice to be there. In some ways, you are saying that I want me to be present in my work, right? That is what the struggle is in some ways. At the same time, there has been, of course, a questioning of this kind of straightforward equation of voice with this essentialized self, right? And this questioning has happened through post-structuralism, and later, of course, by feminists as well, but also through linguists, right? And here, I mean, a lot of you might be more familiar with Bakhtin and his work, but again, Bakhtin's very famous sort of proposition of the multi-voiced nature of our discourse, right? That there are multiple voices and perspectives already that are embedded in our voice, in our language itself. So really, what Bakhtin is doing is he's challenging this idea that there is the the voice belongs to a unified self, right? To this individual, unique, unified self through which the voice is through which the voice is coming. So it is not really, what Bhakti is saying is that voice is not produced by the single one unique person, but really is collectively produced, right? That is the nature of discourse. So I think that introduces a very important, and why I'm spending time on thinking about this. I myself found it useful actually to go back to some of these basics and think this through. Also, because I think it will help us then recast, redefine what we think of voice as well, right? This insistence that my idea needs to come in, or where is my distinctiveness. We also need to then question, when I say my idea, am I locating my idea in like this individual, one person who is thinking of these ideas, or are we, how do we account for the fact that our ideas are formulated collectively, essentially, especially in academic research. It is essentially a social act where we are standing on the shoulders of others who have done this work before. And what we are doing, our arguments, our work, our perspective, is essentially a conversation with existing perspectives, existing ideas, and taking those ideas ahead there, right? So for us also then to think of, does this, is this voice, question this idea of voice is equal to me, and that me is like one unified, essentialized individual self, but you yourselves are, we are all ourselves collectively made, right? And so I think that at that level, if we were to spend some sort of time on thinking about that, questioning that idea of the unified self, or as Bakhtin says, the polyvocality, right, of discourse. We already have multiple voices embedded within what I call as my voice, right? If that we are able to come to terms with, then what my voice means in a text also will change, right? And the insistence on my voice has to come through a particular way will also probably, it will help us to think through, how does then, what are the different ways in which I can be present in my writing, whether there is the I or not. And of course, I'm not at all dismissing the importance of the first person pronoun. That also has had a very, very contested trajectory, history, in the larger process of knowledge making, right? So again, Shabi brought it up that uh, that it has been so much of like the Indian academia, there is a struggle to get in the I, and that in some ways you're made to feel that the I doesn't match up to those other big theorists that who you are citing. Somehow you as the researcher will never get that status of owning your voice as the theorists will, right? And then of course, Faizan, you said that I gives us avoiding the use of first person pronoun then sort of gives a sense of quasi objectivity to it, and that precisely is the larger historical trajectory that we need to place the use of I in, right? That you have the emergence of empirical positivist sciences, where real knowledge was supposed to be empirically derived, to be measured, quantified, and which could be studied by the sort of distanced observer, right? It in fact had to be studied by the distanced observer, where this whole idea of objectivity of knowledge comes from, and the legitimacy of that knowledge then hinges on the objectivity, right? And the moment there is any slip up on that front, if there is any kind of subjective element that comes in, then the validity of that knowledge is questioned. And of course, we know that social sciences, as they emerged, also there was this sort of so much aspiration to get the status of science, right? And which is why a lot of earlier social sciences and a lot of social science practices even now continue to sort of mimic that, so that you say that, oh, the use of I kind of indicates subjectivity is equal to, that means the research is not objective and hence not valid or questionable. But if there is no I use, that means that the research is objective, and hence it is conducted by a distanced researcher, and hence there is possibility that this knowledge is valid. So there is this larger history, right, of the positivist scientific paradigm that shapes how the I has, what place I has in articulating knowledge. Of course, this also has been questioned by feminists, and now, as Shivani also said, more and more in queer theory, in disability studies as well, where really there is the question of, is any knowledge production really an objective enterprise in that sense? Are any researchers really completely objective, standing outside as a distanced researcher? And I mean, there have been there's been a entire body of work, right, which is looking at scientific studies as well, which are talking about ways in which ideologies, politics gets mixed up with allegedly objective research, or the feminist standpoint that really there is no objective research. We all are, in some ways, the researcher is present in the research. And an important thing here then is not to erase the researcher from the knowledge produced, but actually to sort of be present in an ethical way, right? Where the I then is one way in which you make the conditions of production of that knowledge transparent and explicit for your reader, right, with all its biases or possible drawbacks, right? But that is an important ethical imperative of making the researcher explicitly present, so as to not erase the fact that researcher is already always present in the research, right? In various ways. In various ways, you all are, there are you all are deeply personally invested in your research. And so in that sense, you're already there. So this also, of course, there is this larger history to the use of I, larger history to what voice constitutes. And again, one more thing that I will quickly say is, these are larger debates, but again, how this entire history of voice, or I especially, then maps onto the way specific disciplinary trajectories have developed within Indian academia, right? So I have, within English literature, I am not very familiar with the historical trajectory of how English literature as a discipline develops in the Indian context. But for instance, my training is in sociology. And, if you were to look at some literature on history of how the discipline has developed, again, you will see a very similar trajectory of the I simply cannot be used. And it continues to be like that in several sociology departments. Shivani, you can share about political science departments, but we have had conversations where Shivani has also shared that the I really makes faculty and the powers that be very anxious, right? That the presence of I, it also has to do with disciplinary histories of really which have aligned with a very positivist, narrow understanding of research. And hence, there is actually in the teaching also, I mean, there's been a lot of work that I have read on history of sociology, where in sociology there is an active sort of delinking of, researchers' experiential world from the knowledge that they produce, which is really it completely destroys the point. It completely sort of defeats the entire purpose. But sociology students are again and again told that your experience cannot be a valid source of knowledge because it is subjective, it is not objective, right? And that's precisely the place where feminists have come in and said experience is a very, or Dalit writers have come in saying experience is precisely the place from where we will construct knowledge, right? Our subjective experience is precisely where the site of knowledge construction, and that actually that critical voice for a lot of us. So again, the Shabi, the frustration that you expressed also is all this larger history, which gets plotted onto the specific disciplinary trajectories as they play out in specific context. Here we are talking about the context of in Indian academia. Also, of course, I'm sure there is this larger things of, if you go to state universities, it's even worse. If you go to certain central universities, which are now more sort of oriented to a larger global audience, there will be more openness to use of I. Certain disciplines, there will be differences in that. So there are all these, I mean, what you all are experiencing, why I'm doing this is also for you to be able to locate these concerns in a larger context, right? It is not, you're not really alone in this, but really these concerns have been long standing, and these are some of the things that have been talked about. Those disciplinary trajectories definitely need to definitely need, they have determined that. And as Shivani said in her in the session last time, if at your departmental level there are places where you feel those spaces are there, it definitely is worth a fight, right, to have that. But even as you fight for the I to be included in your writing, it's also very important for us to take a step back and question what that I really represents, right? And here again, I'm referring back to that I as an essential, right, like an indicator of an essential self, which is a unique, sort of atomized self, which is not the case. That I is collectively constructed, and that's where then we need to be looking at. I come back to the question of, like specifically in academic writing, thinking of voice. For me, an important way to manifest voice is the ability to really manifest relationality of your research itself, right? And we come back to the point that Aditi made, that research is not really, it's not simply like your venture only, but you're essentially entering a conversation, right? And you're essentially contributing to a conversation, and through that taking the discourse, taking the narrative ahead, contributing in some ways, and which others will then build up upon. So then when you have to, when you're thinking about my voice should be there in my research, what I'm also saying is that the ability for you to bring in exactly that sense of conversation in your writing will be also the place where your voice emerges. And we'll see that in Manishita Das's writing as well. But at a very basic level, what we are seeing is that I construct a narrative of my research by bringing in multiple voices in conversation with each other, by creatively then arranging them. What a few of you already mentioned, that composing, arranging, what Shivani said, curating them in a certain way, by making connections between them and between my research question. That also, and then my voice emerges in that process of me responding to other voices, in play with other voices. It's only in that process that my voice emerges, right? So that relationality of writing, and not just writing, but relationality of the process of research itself, I think we need to keep in the center to be able to then think of what the question of voice in my voice in my writing really will mean. And I refer very quickly, there is this very interesting book by, let me just look at the name, I always forget, by Graf and Birkenstein. It's an older book, I think sometime in the 90s. And the title of that book is They Say, I Say. Right, and it's a wonderful book. I think it's easily available to download on the internet, so you can take a look. It's a very, it's written for undergraduate students, but I think it's still very, very relevant for all of us who are doing research, where they are basically saying that the act of research, writing up research, is the act of they say, doing a they say and I say. How do I bring in what they are saying, and then how do I bring in what I want to say, or how I want to respond to what they are saying? And doing this in this beautiful play really is when my voice emerges in my research writing, right? So in that sense, your articulation becomes a manifestation of several voices that you have assimilated, that you have worked around. And in some ways, if I might go one step ahead and say that a confident owning and a confident recognition precisely of that multivocality of your writing, right? That your writing doesn't have to be earth-shatteringly only yours. It never is, right? But it always is constituted by several other voices which have made our unique perspective. And a certain confident, humble owning of that multivocality also leads to a certain way in which your voice can then come in, how the kind of relationship that you're able to establish with your material, right? So this is a broad, forgive me for going into a lecture mode for some time. I wanted to draw your attention to some of these larger aspects of when we are thinking of voice, and to take that back to your own reflections of what are you really thinking of when you say I want to be present. Who is that I that you're thinking of, right? And we will go to Manishta Das's article, where I think we can see some of these things, how some of these things come into her writing as well. But before we do that, again, any questions or comments? I saw someone had written. Um, yeah, Shivani has said the science bit of political science makes it particularly suspect to any hint of subjectivity. Absolutely, yeah. But any other comments or questions that you might have? I mean, this makes the question of voice a little more abstract because I went in that direction. But we will come back to some very concrete, working with questions of voice.
A little comment, may I?
Yes.
While you were taking us into the larger context, historical context of how to understand historical understandings of where is it coming from. So in that case, you pointed out how feminist discourses challenged objectivity, and how they created a space where first person perspective were in a way allowed to be counted as knowledge. So in that strand, phenomenology also did a amazing shift. And
Yes.
first and other than that, another point is
Yes.
related to how the very genre of essay, when it emerged in 16th century with Montaigne. He talks about how when we are asked to write essays. So if I take my dissertation as as a larger essay on a particular topic, so Montaigne would use he uses I in a sense. He uses I and uses a genre of essay in a way to reveal aspects about I, how I becomes self-revealed in essay. So this angle is, if in a way, gets reduced or erased when one is not using, so to say, I.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Sorry, Anab, did you also have something to say? Yes.
Um, since you were talking about the descent of the I, like from a very Eurocentric individual, rational, modern paradigm. I was reminded because like I said, I'm working on a lot of popular culture in Urdu, and I'm also working on paratext. So I'm working on a lot of editorials and everything. So I feel like from a vernacular perspective, it's very interesting to see that a lot of people who could claim a lot of ownership or authorship in works, they tend not to, because
Yes.
they'd be like, Allah is making me write all this, or it has just come to me, like, sort of dissociate
Hmm.
themselves from an I, to avoid censorship, to
Yes.
avoid attack the
Yeah.
thing that I'm precisely worried about. So it's they're very clever, they're writing in a way, and nobody can say that they didn't write it, or because their name is there,
Yes.
their name is in the heading, so they're not bothered about the fact that they will not get credit, but they're trying to avoid the criticism in, and they're sort of trying to project the authorship in a way, it's a very off-handed,
Mhm.
almost like I have written it, but it's just written through me, so it's
Yeah.
not really me. So I think that's also like a way of looking at the I, the voice in texts as well.
Yes,
So
absolutely. I
just
mean, I think there is again, and this is something that I myself also am not very familiar with, but there is a lot of work again. I mean, you are talking about texts that what is the time period of the texts that you are looking at?
Oh no, this is like a very common refrain right from the
Okay, right.
1890s, 1880s,
Okay,
but it
yeah,
has carried on. So like,
yeah,
especially like with the Masnavis, and because Urdu popular literature really came from a lot of oral literature.
right,
So
right,
there
right.
was some anxiety about claiming authorship anyway.
Yes.
But even after, because British was censoring so much material, which was, they were scared it was anti-national and stuff like that. So they, a lot of prefaces, a lot of editorials, they do sort of take a very off-handed
Yeah, yeah.
perspective on authorship. They don't really want to associate themselves with it, almost like, I've written it, but I would rather have not, or something.
Right, right. There's also some work on like contemporary, but ways of writing in terms of how do people own their writing, right? So, for instance, there is a lot of work on North American academia demands a certain direct straightforwardness, as opposed to there are lots of again cultural differences in terms of how writers want to own their writing. Let's say I mean, I read a few papers in, for instance, Scandinavian countries, or again in China, for instance, right? And all that gets more and more complicated because now we are all writing for a global audience. Read North American audience, right? That is what we are all now. Our writing is largely targeted towards. So yes, that makes it slightly more complicated as well. The question of question of using I and claiming authorship as well. Okay, great. So if there are no other comments, or we can then jump straight into Manishita Das's article. What I'm going to do is I will share um, this. Yeah, let me just share the handout here. Okay. Can everyone see the? Is it okay? Great, visible. Um, the good thing is that in the earlier session, Shivani has worked precisely with this part of Manishita Das's article, which is the introductory part, right? That first two, the quotes, and then the anecdotes, and then her thesis statement, and that paragraph which leads up to the thesis statement. So I'm going to. It's so turned out that we have chosen exactly the same parts, but I think it will be interesting to now see how we can think of voice and how that manifests here, how that relationality is manifesting here. Part of it, again, already you have covered in Shivani's session. So I will Hopefully, we will go through this. You know, won't take a long time. But yeah, so here is the first part that I wanted us to think of, and again, at the risk of repeating what has already happened in the earlier session, but these first two parts, right, where the anecdotes are cited, of Falke when he is watching the film Life of Christ, and you have this longer anecdote that he is writing about, and then we have at the yeah, in the middle here we have Rustamji Dorabji's comments, right, about exhibiting, showing Indian films in his theater, right? I want us to think of again. Shivani gestured towards it, how the author uses these two anecdotes to set up her argument. What I want us to do is to really spend a little time and observe closely how she sets up the argument. And why I want us to spend time on that precisely is to show us where we can locate her voice in how she does that. Right. So, again, to repeat what happened in the earlier session itself, the very fact that, remember, this is the first curatorial act that Manishita Das engages in as the author of this paper, where there is, what Falke has said has not really been put together with what Dorabji has said earlier. It is Manishita Das who is also putting the two, or she's juxtaposing the two together to create a certain narrative. And let's see what certain narrative, because if we were to really actually take away everything that Das has written and simply take these two anecdotes together, right? This actually this paragraph that Falke writes, that I must have seen films on many occasions, but then I saw Life of Christ, and then the images of Krishna and Ram and Gokul Ayodhya started running in front of my eyes, etc. If we were to take only this anecdote, this paragraph, and juxtapose it with the paragraphs that Dorabji says, that these are dirty people, they stain, the beetle leaves stain, I have to disinfect my theaters, etc. We might make connections, but those connections might be very different kinds of connections. That is precisely where we have the author Manishita Das, who is suturing these two, related, but they are not quite about the same thing. But she's suturing these two anecdotes together to lead us to a certain narrative. And let's see what that narrative is, right? I'm not going to now spend time in us reading through this again, because we have read through this in the last session, and I think Shivani has worked on it pretty in greater detail. So I will straight go to some of the things that I want to draw your attention to, right? So, yeah, so here is the first sort of anecdote that she provides of Falke, and and it ends with Falke saying, "This time I felt my imagination taking shape on the screen. Could this really happen? Could we, the sons of India, ever be able to see Indian images on screen?" That's where this anecdote ends, right? Now, remember, this is an anecdote which could be read in many, many ways of what is happening to Falke when he sees the film. What Manishita Das leads us to, she leads us to a particular direction in this, and that direction that she leads us to, I want us to just pay attention to. She then quotes Chabria, right? She does talk about oops, sorry. She does talk about creating a certain audience, which Shivani talked about. But what I want you to pay attention to is what she does later when she brings in Chabria, and how she says Falke created this, this originary myth, right, founding legend. And later, here she talks about how Falke invokes and produces. Okay, invokes and produces a cohesive national audience, right? Happily united in their desire to see their own images on the screen. She goes on to then tell us how, from the beginning, Falke emphasized the nationalist dimension of his films, situating them in the context of the Swadeshi movement. So, from all the things that could have potentially we could have read from that first anecdote of how Falke was enamored, as Shivani said, by the moving images, and how he thought that we should do this in context of Indian images as well. From all the possible readings, she is drawing our attention to the fact that Falke also had this imagination of a nationalist dimension. And interestingly, how she says that produces this image of a national unified audience happily united in their desire to see their own images, right? And the context of Swadeshi as well. It's interesting that then she immediately, though, follows it up with the juxtaposition of Dorabji, where she's saying, however, as the following extract from 1927 deposition by Rustam Dorabji suggests, cinema's emergence as a site of public culture cannot be plotted only along the axis of nation. So why is she doing the first part of setting up, Falke's anecdote and bringing out the nationalist sort of aspiration from there, is precisely to set it up against what Dorabji now has to say, which is, as she said, that cannot be plotted along the axis of the nation, right? There is clearly no happy, united, unified nationalist imagination in the quotes that she is going to then provide, in the quotes that are going to follow. So this setting up is very, very important for her to then lead to her later argument also, which Shivani led us through, right? So this part really is, this juxtaposition, which then allows us to see, ki, oh yeah, here is Falke who is imagining a sort of a unified audience under the underlying principle being a certain incipient nationalism. But then here is Dorabji, who is really, gesturing towards some very clear fault lines between that, in that unified nationalist imagination. And those fault lines really are, as she very clearly gestures towards us, were Dorabji's unabashedly elitist distinctions between whatever Indian habits and the habits of educated man, between better class of Indians and the general public or the crowd or the masses, right? So this really helps us. Remember, this is how she begins her paper with, right? And this setting up of this contrast of these two contradictory things it really sets the tone, really kind of sets the tone for her argument. And which is why, again, when we are talking about what Shivani also very nicely, she put it as, carefully she's curating the curatorial work of putting these, not just bringing them together, but juxtaposing them in a certain way, is precisely where I would locate the author's voice in a very, very powerful way. Now, if I were to give you an exercise in which I say, do not begin with Falke's anecdote, but begin first with Dorabji's anecdotes, and then sort of trace it and then connect it to Falke's anecdote and then set up the argument, it will be a very different, actually, narrative that you will need to build to lead to it, or it might lead to a different, completely different, actually, claim as well, which is where it's not just the it is the curating first of bringing together seemingly disparate at times, sometimes related kinds of pieces of evidence, but also then the composition bit, which means how are you arranging them, right? In what order do they come in your narrative, are very, very important for then the argument to make sense. And this bit actually is really, I mean, at no point here is, we see Das, the author, in that sense, being present in that, but the author is present in a very, very big way in precisely the way these two anecdotes are juxtaposed, right? The way she has plucked them from probably a vast sea of existing archival material, but here is when she actually plucked them out and said, maybe this follows this, and this is how it will, the argument is going to set up, and she develops this argument really, really in a very in a very very, very articulately, very, very effectively, right? I see that the image has disappeared. Can everybody see the image? It's because it's there on my screen, but it's not here.
No, we can't see.
You can't see it? Okay, let me just. I don't know why that. Okay, is it back?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. So the first point really that I wanted to make, for you also to think about your voice, and to also say that that's not just one aspect of, oh yeah, that's one thing, but it is a central aspect of how you are present in your writing, right? The curatorial and the composition choices that you make, the way you choose to, the way you order your evidences, also is a fundamental way in which you are present in your writing. I think a lot of us also, are. And that, I mean, for a good reason also, that that we do this whole thing of this whole taboo of using I, kind of also then puts all the burden of voice only of that, oh, if I can come in my writing, then my voice is really there. But your voice is there in many other ways, and we are learning to give credit to that, so that you are able to recognize ways in which you are present in your writing in many other ways than only being there in the I form, right? So this is one very important authorial choice, authorial decision that you take, and that is the author's agency in actually pulling disparate sources together, pulling different kinds of voices together, and then to make them talk to each other, right? That is a very important aspect of your voice. The second aspect that I want to look at, and again I will also look at exactly the same paragraph, right? The last paragraph, which is really the crux of her argument, which ends with her thesis statement that Shivani took us through, right? But this paragraph also is a beautiful piece of writing which has a very strong authorial voice, right? Not just because there is Manishita Das, who very clearly says, my archival research says this, and as I show in this essay, of course, that is an important part of owning, her work. But but again, to go back to this question of relationality of research and assimilating multiple voices, this is an extremely wonderful example of how she's able to pull in several voices to articulate her own voice, right? And this is a great example of that. So I want us to quickly just look at that. I'm just seeing if I can highlight some of these things here. Um, I don't know why it's not letting me highlight things. Just give me a second. Well, it's letting me edit it, but it's not letting me highlight it. Okay, here it is. Yeah. Okay, now I can highlight some of the things. Yeah, so I want us to, go sentence by sentence exactly how actually Shivani, the highlights that you had made in your paragraph were exactly the same ones. But we'll just read these highlights again differently in terms of how does the author appropriate other voices to then actually articulate her own strong voice, right? So again, my archival research. So we have a very clear, sense of eye on elite cultural constructions of the mass audience in India. Indicates that cinema, but here is the important thing, did not just function as nation building tool that simply engendered community in anonymity in Benedict Anderson's seminal account. So here again, what she's indicating a certain stance that she's taking vis-a-vis Anderson, right? So does she agree with Anderson in this? If
No,
we were to think of
no,
what
no,
is the stance,
not at all.
hmm?
No, 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 ma'am.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Is she not at all agreeing with Anderson in this?
No, ma'am, like not at all. It's saying it
I'm
did
so
not
sorry.
just function. So maybe in
Yes, yes.
addition to that, there
Yes.
is more coming.
Yes, so it's not a straightforward not at all. In fact, she does agree with Anderson to some extent, saying it did function as a nation building tool, but it did not just function as a nation building. So she's agreeing with Anderson to a degree, to an extent, right? Right, and then so here is and she says that it did not just function as a nation building tool, like Benedict Anderson's seminal account tells us to. So now she's already set us up where we know that she agrees with Anderson, but not entirely. There is, when you say there is not just this, you also know that there is but also something else is going to come. So she's setting us up with that anticipation, but she's told us what her stance with Benedict Anderson's towards Benedict Anderson's imagined communities is, right? Again, the coming back to that word, Shivani, I remember you had also highlighted the undoubtedly, right? So again, undoubtedly, cinema played a key role in extending Indian public sphere beyond the confines of the lettered city. Right, and then here she is referring the lettered city. If we were to look at the footnote, she very clearly again tells us who she's drawing upon when she is using the word lettered city, right? So here is a very clear someone else's voice that she is appropriating using the very same word, right? The lettered city, right? As is the name of the book, as is the name of the work. So she is appropriating that voice, but very clearly also attributing it to the author. So she's saying undoubtedly cinema did play a role in extending Indian public sphere. Again, is she disagreeing with the author then? Not at all. she's not disagreeing, saying, under I again, without a doubt, this also did happen, right? That cinema did extend it beyond, it did democratize the public sphere to an extent, right? Um, yeah, and by which I mean a public sphere shaped. So she's telling us where her lettered, what she means by a lettered city, etc., etc. And then here is, though, the change in logic where she's introducing her, her argument here, right? However, that's again the key word here. Even as it expanded the space of nation beyond the public sphere of colonial elite. So again, she's telling that I do agree to an extent with with Anderson's, Anderson's argument. Um, she said that cinema introduced a new set of powerful cultural distinctions and context of consumption that were not particularly conducive to imagining the space as unified, homogeneous, and to picturing the audience as fraternity of equals, horizontal comradeship, very clearly again referencing Benedict Anderson. So while she also agrees with Benedict Anderson in the earlier part, saying it did not just function to some extent it did function, she also again references Anderson, saying this is not what cinema did, right? This is, it did not really, it cannot be said to be creating an audience as a fraternity of equals or horizontal comradeship that Anderson has come up with, right? So very clearly she's telling us the points where she agrees with existent literature, with existent discourse, but where she differs from the existent discourse, right? Let's see what she says ahead. Spectatorship emerged in colonial India as a site not just of imagining community, but also of asserting class difference and social hierarchies. Now, this is a straightforward claim, very strong claim that Das makes in her own voice. This is not reference to anybody. These are her words. But again, even within this voice, we find one more voice, right? One more voice, and that of, again, same thing. Spectatorship emerged not just as a site of imagining community, but also, and so that's where she brings in what my argument is, that it also was a site of asserting class difference, class distinctions, social hierarchies, right? So why I'm taking you through this is to really, this paragraph beautifully shows how the author establishes her relationship with the other literature that she's using. That it's not simply bringing in Anderson says this, but there is a very clear stance that she takes vis-a-vis Anderson, and it is not a simple I agree or I disagree, but it is really this more complex play, right? That to an extent I agree, but this is the point which I don't agree. To an extent, undoubtedly this is true, but this part is not true, right? And that's where it sort of really gives a very strong sense of authorial voice, where it's not the material that is driving her narrative, it is really she is in charge of the material which she is using, which she is choosing to use in order to substantiate her argument, right? So really here we see the author as being the driver of this narrative, not Anderson or 50 other voices that they have quoted. They are not the drivers. It is the author who is definitely in driver's seat, assimilating, bringing in, agreeing to an extent, disagreeing to an extent. So it is a very beautiful play of establishing that relationality to it, right? And we come finally at that last sort of thesis statement, which again was discussed in a great way in Shivani's session, right? That as I show in this essay through an analysis of the elite perceptions of the mass audience that are recorded in Indian ICC documents, of 1928, the westernized middle class elite saw the public space created by cinema as a zone of contestations internally marked by cultural difference and heterogeneous histories of contending peoples, antagonistic authorities, and tense cultural locations. We discussed in last session, Shivani discussed how Manishita Das actually brings in Bhabha to make her argument. And actually, I think this is a very remarkable thesis statement, because here is an author who's actually bringing in actually a quote by another author in what is their central argument. Right now, this ideally, will actually undercut the power of, well, if it is your thesis statement, shouldn't you be writing what your main argument is? You're simply actually using a quote by someone else to say what your main argument is, right? What I feel though, what I think, I mean, of course, this is also because now we have read Manishita Das's article, we've seen how expertly she weaves in other voices, assimilates other things to make her point, which is why I will not evaluate this as, oh, this is not her argument. She's simply borrowing words from Bhabha to say complex things. She is actually, and what I did here, I think, I hope this will be visible to you. I have added a comment here, and yeah, I have. Is this visible? Yes, but it probably is not as visible. But I looked up this reference of Bhabha that she gives, right, which is, I think, a chapter from dissemination. Yeah, and I
Madhura, sorry, could you paste this comment in the chat for us?
yes. Let me see if I can copy this. Yeah, because it's not as visible, right? Copy and sorry, I will just need to, because I'm sharing my screen. So where's the chat? I don't know why I can't see the chat.
It's called in call messages, the option.
The three, there
Oh,
is
Call message.
right. Okay, so let me just paste it here. Perfect. Yeah, so I'll shut this and everyone can everyone see the,
sorry, Madhura, it hasn't come fully. I think there's a word limit problem.
oh, right. Okay, so in the
In the
Google
Google
Doc.
Doc, I'll just share the link again.
Yeah. Sorry, these are all.
Here you
Has
go.
anyone read that? By any chance, read that chapter?
Which chapter is this one?
Um, I mean, from Bhaba's book,
Yeah,
Dissemination. I think
read
it's
parts of it.
chapter.
That's why I'm asking.
I actually don't remember now which chapter it is. I think it's towards the end. Um,
Madhura, I've shared the link. You can just,
okay, great. So it's in the chat, na?
yeah.
Oh, great. It's opening, so I'll just copy it here. I don't know why I'm not able to. I should be able to copy it, right?
Yeah. This is edit for all.
I'm not able to do that at all, actually.
Acha.
It's strange.
Then I guess let it be. Let you continue with your.
Yeah, I'm sorry about this. This is just so like, oof. I think every time I trust the tablet to work for me, it always gives me some kind of.
Acha, but it's useless.
I'm so sorry, everyone, but you probably have only part of it, right? Well, it's Bhabha. I think whether I added two paragraphs before this, whether I add three paragraphs after that, there might be certain things which will still be quite unclear. Um, oh God, I don't know how to go back. Okay, just give me a second. I'm so sorry. This is just like really all over the place.
Madhura, select handout 2 from the left hand side menu, the recent menu.
Yeah, I don't know why that. No, it's not. It's not. I'm going to do this. I'm just going to share it from here. It's
Yeah.
just easier. Okay, is that visible now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this might also actually be visible in a better way, or no, not really.
Madhura, I have just pasted your section on Google Doc. Would you mind seeing it? Is it the complete thing?
It is visible in this screen share. Actually,
It
it
is.
is. Yes.
Yeah, I've also pasted it there, so in case
Yeah.
anybody wants to.
In any case, that's okay. I mean, we don't need to really go through this in great detail. Um, the point of actually doing this exercise was for us to think of why does in what way is Manishita Das sort of transposing the argument that Bhabha makes in a, here's a completely different chapter, different book, but she is transposing the argument that he is making, word to word, verbatim. She's quoting Bhabha, right? She's quoting him in what is her central argument, right? Now, to give you a quick for those of you who've read this particular book and this particular chapter might be much more clear. For those of you who haven't, very broadly speaking, Bhabha is talking about the split nation really in this particular chapter, and also to talk about how there is always like a counter narrative to the official discourse of the nation. I mean, I'm it's oversimplifying Baba's argument here, but to really give an understanding of in what context does Manishita Das think that this particular argument can be then transposed to her thesis statement, right? So Bhabha is questioning this, the unified nation, talking about the split nation, that there is the official discourse and there is the people as lived kind of discourse, which refuses to fit into this official narrative of the nation. And which is why this particular quote of internally the nation space, which is marked by cultural difference, heterogeneous histories of contending people, etc., tense cultural locations, right? So this is, and it is very, very interesting that Manishita Das, in her central thesis statement, in her central argument, actually is bringing in two very important voices. One is, when she's saying the westernized middle class elite saw the public space created by cinema as a zone of contestations, she's already telling us that her understanding of westernized middle class, middle class elite is, she's drawing that from Sanjay Joshi's work, right? And there's a very clear attribution she makes. And the second part of how this was a zone of contestations, that there were all these other kind of counter narratives, she's actually borrowing that verbatim from Homi Bhabha, right? Here I want to actually, and this I want us to focus on, this thing that she's doing, where she's actually making her own argument in the voice of someone else, and does that then take away her voice itself? So here is something that I found, on when I was reading around Bakhtin, right? And I'm going to read out this. It's a quote that I have taken from this essay. A particularly useful way to think about the relation of writer's voice to those other voices is Bakhtin's notion of double voicing, right? And this is exactly what, in a way, a perfect example of what we call double voicing. So it's Voloshinov, in 1986, Bakhtin's colleague, explained that an author may utilize the speech act of another in pursuit of his or her own aims, right? Which is exactly what Das is doing. That this is her argument that she's making, and she's using Bhabha's quotes, Bhabha's words, and in such a way as to impose a new intention on the utterance. Right? So she's not really talking about nation per se that Bhabha is talking about. She's using it in a different context, but which nevertheless retains its own proper referential intention. Which absolutely it does, because it is, Bhabha is talking about the nation as a unified space and the counter narratives to that. So the conceptual reference stays the same. Under these circumstances, and in keeping with the author's purpose, such an utterance must be recognized as originating from another addresser, which is precisely why the citation is there. But thus, it is also Manishita Das's thesis statement. Within a single utterance here, there may occur two intentions and two voices, right? It's a straightforward, actually, now in retrospect, when you look at it, it's a straightforward contention that he's making. But again, for us to understand that, our Manishita Das's argument, really, which is her argument. We saw in Shivani's session how this is such a strong thesis statement, but we also see that this thesis statement really is combined, is accumulation of at least two very strong voices that she is bringing in from a different context, but something that can still be transported, that she is doing this double voicing, that she's managing to do. And I feel that, in fact, given the way in which she establishes relationship with other material in the beginning, this is actually, for me, this is a remarkably confident voice that is okay with the polyvocality of their own voice, right? Which precisely is the confidence that she is owning up that, look, my primary thesis statement is made up of other people's voices, but yet I'm making an argument which is slightly different from the earlier literature that I have established relationship with. So I think that precisely is an indicator of a a confident authorial voice. The comfort with which you're able to own the multiple voicedness of your perspective, right? Where she fronts those multiple voices at every single point. So much so that in her own thesis statement, she actually uses a quote, which actually is a rare thing. We do not see many research papers or arguments where the main argument is actually a quote by someone else. So it is of course fronting that polylocality and a certain confidence, a certain comfort with that. And I think that that precisely is I mean, I don't want to talk about this simply as a skill or a technique, but I want us to think in philosophically in that term of how are we comfortable with polywocality of our voices, of our perspective, of the recognition and acknowledgement that what that original argument that I make is essentially made up of several other voices and perspectives, and that is okay, right? That is actually fine. It's not that earth shattering singular unique my own thing that I'm coming up with. And you will still come up with your with something that pushes the narrative ahead, which pushes the conversation ahead, which you will. But I think to begin with, we need to acknowledge and understand our own comfort with this polylocality, right? So that is an important thing that I wanted to point out in this particular example. It's 3:37. We have time till 5, right, Shabi?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so then I would like us to take a break because we've done a lot of, we've done that initial, we've covered a lot of ground. So let's take about 10 minutes break and come back where I want us to look at some other parts of Manishita Das's article, in which again we will see how voice manifests in a different way, and these are also very concrete ways in which voice manifests. I also want to think of certain word choices, for instance, certain ways in which Das qualifies her material. That in itself is also an important site of the authorial voice. So we'll come back to that. Let's take about 10 minutes and then we come back to let's come back again to the class.
भाई ये क्या कह रही है स्मिता?
Ma'am, it's not directly related to voice question,
नहीं
but
एक बार
Sure.
बोलो क्यों?
are you here, ma'am?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
एक
I can.
एक
Yeah.
इसका पॉइंट
So
Yeah.
I was wondering. I mean,
थीसिस स्टेटमेंट में था because
the way she is constructing her argument.
on this
Uh,
ठीक है
on
she
left hand
argues
side,
the same
she has
argument because
one
that is a
thing. On the
workshop.
other,
You
she
can't
has
you
another thing.
can't
And
treat
in
it as
between,
a
she is
lecture
positioning
and और thesis
her point, her
that's when I
perspective.
left ठीक है
Right, ma'am.
मतलब she is the
But the way she
ठीक
is
है
doing
but
it,
when the
I mean, we
entire
are
time this is
told
not a
to
workshop of PhD
that we
scholars
are supposed to
this is entirely
contextualize
a
whatever
workshop
we are
of
taking
PhD
from
scholars
anyway.
because still
Mm-hmm.
The
people
kind
like
of
me are
contextualization we
actually
are
struggling to
told is not
write
there here,
and
is not there
writing
in the
only
essay.
comes a
She is
year
simply
after you
taking
have enrolled in
one
PhD,
strand,
so
one
she
very
was not going
particular,
to say that.
specific strand from
मैं
Bhava
MA स्टूडेंट्स को
without
बताती
ever
हूँ
going into
कि
the
फाइन तुम
specificities
MA
like
से
in
अभी
what
भले
context
ही
Bhava
तुम
did say
अपने
such
आप को
things.
30 मार्क का समझ
Mm-hmm.
रहे
How
हो
did
बट
she able
फिर
to
ये पहले
appropriate? So
सवाल
that kind of
स्ट्रक्चर भाई अगर
that
तुमने
kind
वो
of thing
अटेंड
is
किया होगा तो
I
शी
couldn't find
एक्चुअली टॉक्ड
here.
अबाउट
So
क्लेम्स
yeah, so
एविडेंस
absolutely, she's
इंट्रोड्यूसिंग
not doing
एविडेंस
that. But there is
एल्गोरिथम्स
also
elaborating the
precisely
evidence and writing a
that's where
justification
it is,
she talked
which
about
is
a
why I
paper
did this
कि
exercise. The
actually
thing
they
is that you don't
अगर
need to do that kind of
directly topic पे चले
contextualization
जाते
for
हैं तो
every
they
single
didn't tell
thing.
us about the formats
That's
what
where the
formats are you
confident
actually
author, the confident voice of, she clearly is confident that she's transposing one into the other in a very clear. There is already an established body of work where we know what Bhaba's overall sort of argument has been, right? So I think that that precisely is the confidence of transposing something from an arena which she knows kind of is not the same, but yet still applies here, which is the reason why I think that that particularly actually is a remarkable sort of confident voice that you hear where, and it's actually not you're right, it's actually very rare. And Shivani, sort of correct me if I'm, but I haven't read many thesis statements which actually use another author's quote as, you know, in their own thesis statement, which is why I thought it was very remarkable, precisely that, you know, the confidence that you're transposing between two contexts, but you are actually but it actually works. I actually, Faizan, you know, interestingly, I actually looked it up precisely because I wanted to check what is Baba saying, you know, in that, because I had read that essay earlier. So I was like, I wanted to know what is Baba saying and does that really match, right? So it's also like the citational practice also is like, you know, I know what I'm doing, but if you're interested, here is the citation for you to also corroborate if that,
A
if that.
better, I mean, a more substantial footnote would have addressed this thing.
Can I come in here once, Madhura?
Yes, yes, yes.
I think also what's happening here, Madhura, if you can just scroll to that part.
Yeah.
I think also what's happening here, why the
Take
need
second,
for
I'll just, sorry,
yeah,
I'll
yeah,
just
sure.
show you.
Why the need for not setting up a context is also because at this point, Bhaba and his writings have almost become concepts.
Mm.
And concepts also free float at times. So, you know, if she had gone on to contextualize Bhaba or introduce Bhaba, that would also seem a little either redundant at this point or would also take away from her argument. But you know what she's bringing of Bhaba here? I haven't read Bhaba, but I'm assuming, given what Mathura showed us, and also I'm assuming this because she's using another concept here, which she's actually not marking, but this idea of zone of contestation is a concept. It's not her idea. Many people have used zone of contestation so much so that it's now, I'm forgetting who proposed it, but it's now almost like this free floating concept which you can pick up and your readers will know what this means. So similarly, I think this idea of heterogeneous history or antagonistic authority from Bhaba also becomes like that concept that can be picked up and used from different contexts here and there. Anybody lesser known than Bhaba would
Would
probably
need
need
that,
it.
would need that contextualization.
Yeah, and then would probably not make it into a thesis statement. You know, but Bhaba also has that reputation now of being a concept, right?
And he's severally in several places, at several places, he's talked about third space, different nuances of third
Yeah.
space. So, which is a space neither here nor there. And a lot of these people have talked about it. So, that thirdness or the idea that neitherness, the lack of boundaries, all of these things, similar things have been conceptualized by him already.
Yeah, and it also sort of, sorry, Madhura, coming in again, but
No, no, please do, please do.
I think it's also the readership in the sense that this journal and Das is assuming,
Yeah.
rightly so, that there's a certain readership who will immediately pick up on Bhaba,
Yeah.
who will immediately pick up on zone of contestation, right? So there's also that. I mean, she's relying on the reader to pick it up as this iconic concept.
One more thing, in one of her footnotes, for example, where she talks about how her idea
Yeah. Which
lettered,
one?
lettered city, right?
Yeah.
She is But she does not. I mean, even in passing, I mean, I was expecting a substantial footnote in the sense of how she is appropriating. That is not apparent to the reader. If a particular context has been used in letter city by so and so writer, but she is also drawing upon how her appropriation is in action here is not has not been shown. But she has done something of of this kind in her another footnote, which is foot number 12, which she says, I follow upon Sanjay Joshi's fractured modernity, and so and so. She elaborates on. But in terms of lettered city, she does not, which is a very key idea in the paper. Lettered city, how this idea was earlier formed in a particular thinker's work, and how she is appropriating that angle is not there. So I thought a better footnote would have been there.
Yeah, I think I do agree with you. I mean, now that you have the lettered city, yeah, that could have done with a little more
Substance.
teasing out or fleshing out of in what ways. Because I think one part, important part also is an important part also is to sort of to demonstrate to the reader how you have interpreted that, and whether that interpretation, then to leave it to the reader to
Right,
also
right,
take a call about the validity of that
right,
interpretation.
right.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that makes sense.
विष्णु कहाँ है? आ रहा है
Yeah,
कि
I
नहीं?
think as Shivani also said that a lot of this also, I think I have a feeling, is also shaped by which journals you publish in, what is the readership assumed for those journals, because I'm sure these have also gone through editorial, the whole peer review and editorial process, where something like this has also then, the fact that the lettered city has not been contextualized as much, has clearly gone through that editorial process. So again, I'm also wondering, I'm not very familiar with this author, but again, within this particular disciplinary background, if that is again something that doesn't need that contextualization. But yes, I do see where you're coming from, Faizan, in terms of for the reader to know how you have interpreted that or how you have appropriated that
And
voice.
the journal I work with, I mean, we make it sure that the author do some, substantial footnotes wherever required. So in that case, I mean, yeah, you're right. It's an editorial decision, right?
Yeah, yeah. But I think that's already like that's all. So you're already thinking in terms of then, how your voice or how the authorial voice will function, where you are thinking of where contextualization needs to be done, where that direction needs to be given to the reader, which also is a part of, which also is an important part of the authorial voice, really.
So do we have time, or are you starting, ma'am?
Yes, I think, are we done with, yeah, about 10 minutes? Let's start in a minute. I'm going to actually look at, is there anything else I have to share? Let's just wait for a minute and then begin.
So in the meantime, can I make a point?
Sorry, in the meantime, yeah, I
Can
missed.
can I make a point? I mean,
Yes, sure, sure, sure.
I was looking at the abstract. It's a very cleverly constructed abstract. It has only three, I think, two or three lines, and it says a great deal about what is coming in the paper. But somehow I found that the abstract could have been a little long. I mean, uh, we, I mean, if an abstract says what paper is all about, and how, what and how of the paper becomes visible in the abstract. So in that case, I thought, what would have been the reasons to construct this paragraph in such a limit. I mean, two or three lines.
I mean, anybody's guess. Again, my strong hunches could be, the specific editorial requirements. Um, it could be that, because generally I haven't seen such small abstracts. I have seen longer ones, but it could very well be a disciplinary, not disciplinary, but journal requirement
Right, right.
as well.
It's usually an editorial decision that how
Hmm.
long should your
How
abstract
long the
be.
abstracts should be.
Or, she was bored. I mean, that's possible. I mean,
Yeah, after writing the whole.
this whole thing, and
After
like,
so many drafts.
yeah, and then somebody. I mean, let's be real. That's how it happens. And then somebody in the editorial said, "Oh, you haven't given an abstract," and all she can do at that point is these 4 lines. I think it's
But
okay.
has it happened to you ever that you run out of words to say the
Yes,
same thing, right?
yes.
And you're
And
like,
then journals will tell you, don't use words, don't use sentences from the article. And
yeah,
you need to cry
exactly.
at that point.
Yes. Or then you want to say that, well, I've already said this in the introduction, but now how do I say it again in some other part, right? But because that's exactly what I want to say again. So, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It could be very much that.
What are
Okay. All right. So, yeah, just a couple of things. So, should we begin then? Yeah. Okay. So before we go on to the next sort of set of passages that I want to bring in from Manishita Das, I want to still work with this particular the introductory passage. There's a lot that we have really mined it today in the first and second session. But the other thing that I wanted to bring in, so what we discussed was also this the authorial choice of how you bring together, how you order certain anecdotes, evidence, whatever, to sort of build it up towards your argument. The second was how do you appropriate multiple voices and bring in relationality to that sense of conversation to your writing, where the reader is able to place you in a larger dialogue that is going on. The third thing that also is an important part of voice is really, for instance, though this is not as important a part, but definitely does contribute to it, is really some of the linguistic choices that you make, the ways in which you qualify your material, right? What are the words that you choose to qualify your evidence, to qualify your material, also is a very important. And that's not just about style in many ways. It is also about how the reader is predisposed then to the argument that you're trying to make, right? For instance, in, look at this beginning. Is this visible, everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so for instance, again, here is how the paper itself begins, right? One day in December 1910, Marathi commercial artist, entrepreneur Dhundiraj Govind Phalke went to the America India Picture Palace in Bombay to see the life of Christ, right? I think it's again, I think it's, I like the choice of this beginning because it kind of it is a kind of a dramatic beginning, right? That almost as if she's telling a story that one day this happened and Palke went to watch this film, right? Almost like you begin a story, a hint of drama to it, right? This is a peer-reviewed journal paper, so there is only a hint of drama, but I like the hint of drama that she brings into the narrative that is now about to unfold as the beginning to this anecdote that she is going to tell us, right? And then, she gives us this anecdote. anecdote, and we, as soon as the anecdote is over, could this really happen? Could we, the sons of India, ever be able to see Indian images on the screen, right? Falke's urge to bring Indian images to the screen for Sons of India, she's again drawing from that anecdote and putting that in her sentence. I feel that's a very important choice that she makes. Remember, she's already beginning to build her narrative to tease out the nationalist aspect, so that she can juxtapose it against what Dorabji has to say. So I find again the choice of, the fact that she chooses to bring these words, the Indian images for Sons of India. Clearly, there is an underlying nationalist sentiment that she wants to highlight there, which is why she's bringing that in. These are just certain choices, and these are, that I want us to just pay attention to, or, just notice how some of these qualifications are done, right? The next part here, in this origin myth of Indian cinema, carefully crafted by Falke himself, cinema operates as a visual technology of collective identification that simultaneously invokes and produces a cohesive national audience, happily united in their desire to see their own images on the screen. Again, here is remember, here is Manishita Das, who is qualifying this, the larger point that she started out with, that Falke was imagining his venture, his endeavor to produce Indian images in the larger nationalist kind of a discourse, right? So this, but look at the choice of words of a national audience happily united in their desire to see their own images. I feel that why this is important is precisely because what comes later is anything but that happily united together in desire to see common images. What Dorabji says is so opposite of that happy, united, happy Indian national family, that this kind of increases the sort of the contrast between the two. And that's why I think this is a very interesting choice of words that she has used to set up that contrast as well, right? Again, I mean, this is my reading of it, right? But I find I'm looking at certain words, certain choice of words, which strike to me as doing some important work for the author's argument here, right? Small qualifications, right? Dorabji vehemently objected to the suggested government imposed quota. These are very small things. I'm sure we all do these qualifications, but the way we qualify these evidences, I think, is very, very important place where you are actually also indicating your stance towards either your primary data or the literature or the material that you are using, right? Again, here she gives us Dorabji's, the quotes that Dorabji gives, but she qualifies these quotes. She's telling us her evaluation of these quotes, where she very clearly says, unabashedly elitist distinctions, right? Which again, even if she had said Dorabji's elitist distinctions, it's technically still, it's still accurate, the interpretation that this is elitist. But the word, addition of the word unabashedly, I think adds that slight amount of also, again, her evaluation to it, that just the kind of complete sort of unabashed way in which Dorabji could express, whatever the educated and the better class and the lower class and so on and so forth. So I feel, I mean, this is not a very big part really of voice, but I feel that these things do count towards how you bring in your evaluations, your interpretations into your writing. Don't be shy of using, of course, I mean, there is, as academic writers, we are expected not to use too many adjectives, not to make the language there is all those things of flowery language and not use too many adjectives. But of course there are certain places where if you need to qualify your material or the primary data, please do qualify that, because it does add one more layer of evaluation to it. Your voice does come in there. But of course you need to be aware precisely why you're qualifying certain material the way you are, right? So that's an important thing to think about. So these were a few sort of places which struck me when I was reading this particular paragraph, in terms of just choice of phrases, choice of words, how certain things are qualified, and so on and so forth. So that's one thing. I do want to, though, hold on to this bit of how do you qualify your material, because that is really one place where your voice comes in. And I want to stop sharing this and take you towards another set of two or three passages uh, from Manishita Das's article. Let me just share that with you. Okay, these are really random actually, but I have chosen them for a particular reason. Um, can I just have a volunteer who will read this first sentence for us?
Ma'am, may I?
Yes, please.
As Veena Naregal points out in her study of the hierarchical relations between English and vernacular spheres in Maharashtra between 1830 and 1881, these policies altered the universe of communicative and cultural practices of the subcontinent and introduced crucial hierarchical and ideological divisions between the newly educated and illiterate English knowing and vernacular speaking sections of native society.
Great, thank you. So clearly, here she is citing a quotation by Veena Naregal, right? And let's just quickly scroll down to see what the footnote. Yeah, the footnote gives us the citation. This is the place where she's taken this quotation. But to go back to this particular quote, right? What is important, and what I think, we teach this in undergraduates, but I think it remains relevant throughout all, for all writing, is to be able to qualify the quotes that you use, right? Many times I think we are not quite taught to qualify our quotes. Look at what she is doing here. As Veena Naragal points out in her study of the hierarchical relations between English and vernacular spheres in Maharashtra between 1830 and 1881, these policies. What is this doing to the court, do you think?
Qualifying the context in which the original work is written and how it is related with the current.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It is sort of elaborating a little bit, trying to contextualize the quote a bit, right? And trying to also locate it where she is talking about, right? So I think that precisely is a very, very important qualification, especially when you are giving quotes, right, in your writing. That's a very important thing. Many times in our writing we tend to simply say, as Veena Naragal says, or Veena Naragal mentions, or Veena Naragal writes, right? And then that is there. But something like this, which establishes context, in technical terms we call this the introductory tag to a quote, right? But to be able to give this introductory tag to quotes that you use are not simply a matter of like technical thing, but it actually really establishes a certain narrative flow to your writing, but also again, here is a way in which you are not simply presenting the reader a quote saying, here is what, but you are taking charge of the quote. You are taking charge and saying, I'm going to use this voice in this way in my writing. This is how it connects to what I am talking about, right? So in that sense, writing those introductory tags is a very important move in which you are also inserting, you are present in that, because you are saying that I am giving the reader a direction in how to read this quote, in how to actually be oriented towards this quote. So what happens is, in a lot of times, in a lot of writing, especially when reviews of literature are being written, a lot of students do tend to give a lot of quotes, but many times the reader doesn't know why that quote is there, or what is it doing there, right? Or why, or the a qualification of the quote. And so these are some ways in which also your voice, actually you are present in that, in ways which you're not, in ways in which you're justifying why that quote is there to your reader. And that's an important presence in the text. If we can quickly go on to the next one here. Can I have someone else read this?
May I go ahead, ma'am? Am
Yes.
I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, so from while trying, right?
Yes.
While trying to explain the sociological roots of this taste, Firoz Shah J. Marzban of Bombay, editor of the weekly Jam-e Jamshed, for instance, lamented the fact that the quote unquote educated cinema goer was quote more saturated with English literature and history than unfortunately his own national literature and history unquote. He concluded, however, by asserting that the standards of excellence to which the educated Indian had become accustomed through his overexposure to the art of the West made him particularly sensitive to the quote the shortcomings of Indian productions unquote.
Yeah, great. So again, here is quotes being used by Marzban from her primary data, right, from the ICC hearings. But it's very interesting how Das uses these quotes, right? These are not again block quotes. It's very important that what she is also doing is that she is writing those quotes in such a way as to also tell us how there was a contradiction between what Marzban said. That on the one hand, he lamented that, we don't know much more about our own national literature history. But on the other side, there also was this thing of, there were these shortcomings of Indian productions, and hence they were not able to really appreciate the Indian productions as well, right? So this is also a very important way in which you take charge of a quote, right? You are saying that I want to direct the reader to look at the quote in a way that I am shaping my argument around it, right? So it is not, this is really an important way to take charge of your writing. This is also an important place actually, where we might not necessarily recognize this as a place of voice, but this is an important place where your voice comes in. So especially, at a very straightforward, simple level, I would say every time you want to use a verbatim quote, try and write that introductory, qualify that quote, write that introductory tag, and in a way that, of course, it sort of enables the transition from what you have said earlier, and you will see that there is a certain difference that it makes, but you also are inserting yourself in the text, where you're saying, I am sort of leading the reader in how these quotes should be read, right? So that is again a very very important part of how you are present in the text, but doesn't might not necessarily get recognized as your presence, your author's voice in the text, right? There are a couple of other important, there are a couple of many other places like this. I don't want to go through all of them, but I want to there are two or three other quick things that I want us to look at. And here is this particular passage that I want us to look at, right? This is again being taken somewhere in the later part. And I find this to be very important also because, again, to look at the question of use of evidence, and when you are using evidence, what that does to your voice. Because when you're using evidence, you're either citing quotes, you're either paraphrasing, and so what happens in the middle of all this to your voice? Where do you locate the author's voice in that, right? So here is this particular passage. Can I please have somebody read this out for us?
Sure. From my find, ma'am?
Yeah.
I find the concept of the bazaar, especially as elaborated by the historian Dipesh Chakrabarti, particularly useful in thinking about elite responses to the emergence of the quote Indian audience unquote. Chakrabarti uses the term bazaar, literally marketplace, to denote, and I quote, the paradigm form of the outside unquote in India, quote, an unenclosed, exposed, and interstitial outside the acts as the meeting point of several communities, unquote, and combines the purpose of economic exchange with those of popular recreation and social interaction.
Yeah, can you go ahead?
Yeah. In historical scholarship on colonial India, the bazaar emerges as one of the most public of spaces in Indian cities and towns, and as a persistent focus of both colonialist and nationalist concerns about dirt and disorder. As Chakrabarti points out, the congested, chaotic, and volatile space of the bazaar contradicted all the norms of the bourgeois civic order espoused by both the British administration and the nationalist elite, albeit for different reasons, and frustrated all attempts to transform it into a benign, disciplined, regulated space. Quote, clean and healthy, incapable of producing either disease or disorder, unquote. While the British saw it as the breeding ground of epidemics and sedition, the nationalist elite saw the bazaar primarily as an epitome of the troubling habits and practices of a burgeoning urban underclass that represented one of the major challenges to its authority. The control and regulation of urban space and efforts to make the poor conform in their use of public space to emerging bourgeois notions of order and hygiene were in fact central to the assertion of middle class social supremacy in the city. Elite accounts of the rowdiness of the gallery audience and Dorabji's depiction of the Indian audience as a threat to public health can be seen as part of this contemporary discourse about the bazaar as a site of unsanitary practices, social deviance, and moral decay. Quote, a place against which one needs protection. Unquote.
Great. Thank you so much, Shabi. So here is this, again, an interesting passage. I think it comes in that contagious modernity part of the essay, I think. But I want us to think of how the ways in which Manishta Das, as the author, brings in evidence and how she works with evidence here, and what that says about, again, how can we then locate her voice in this? Because a lot of it here is actually she is using Dipesh Chakravarti's work in a big way here, right? To understand, interpret what was happening in how people were viewing, in how the indigenous elites were viewing the space of the cinema, right? So she is clearly using that. But then how do we read her voice in this particular, in bringing evidence in her writing, right? So here is one place where in the beginning, of course, she is referring to Dipesh Chakrabarti's work and actually cites a verbatim quote here, right, by Dipesh Chakrabarti to talk about the, the outside, the notion of outside that he conceptualizes. You see that she goes ahead where she also brings in other work where the bazaar has emerged as one of the most public spaces in Indian cities and towns, a focus of nationalist, colonialist concerns of dirt and disorder. Now, here, though, of course, I'm just going to take you to the footnotes to see who she's referring to. There are two works that she refers to, Anand Yang and Veena Talwar Oldenburg, to basically substantiate her claim that bazaar is one of the most public spaces in Indian cities, the concerns associated with the bazaar. She goes back to Chakrabarti here, where she is now not citing a quote as much as also paraphrasing Chakrabarti's argument, right? That the congested, chaotic, volatile, etc., etc., contradicted all norms of bourgeois civic order and frustrated all attempts. Briefly, she again goes into citing a quote, and then she is interpreting, again, sort of referring to what Dipesh Chakrabarti is saying, but also bringing in an interpretation. And here again, you have the control and regulation of urban space and efforts to make the poor conform in their views of public space to emerging bourgeois notions of order and hygiene were, in fact, central to the assertion of middle class social supremacy in the city. I think she is also referring to Shudipto Kaviraj's work here. Yes. So she's bringing in Shudipto Kaviraj here as well. Now, it's very important for me. What is interesting to see in these first two paragraphs is again, the authorial choice in the weightage that is given to Dipesh Chakrabarti versus, let's say, Yang and Oldenburg and Shudipto Kaviraj, right? There are two or three authors and their work which comes only as a reference in the footnote, while there is Dipesh Chakrabarti and, his work on Bazaar is definitely, there is a quotation that's cited, there is also paraphrasing, there is a larger part devoted to it, because clearly that she is making use of that in a bigger way to base her interpretations on, right? So that again is a very, very important authorial choice that you make of who is at that particular point, your research question or whatever the claim, the topic sentence that you are working with, that demands what kind of evidence does that demand, right? Does that demand this demands a longer bit from Dipesh Chakrabarti because she's relying more heavily on that concept. But to substantiate it, there will be Kaviraj and there will be Oldenburg and and Yang, whose work is cited. But then the weight that is given to Chakrabarti clearly is more in terms of how she uses his concepts to interpret her material, right? So that also is a very, very important authorial choice that you're making. It also is indicating to me that as a writer, the writer is clearly very aware of which material is relevant at which point and in what way can that be used, which is a very, very important way in which I hear the writer's voice actually in this. Even though most of it is being sort of, she's interpreting what is happening, very much using Dipesh Chakrabarti, reporting Dipesh Chakrabarti's work, and yet I would locate the author's voice in this. The last paragraph is particularly interesting in terms of, again, where I can locate the author's voice, where she's saying elite accounts of the rowdiness of the gallery audience and Dorabji's depiction of the Indian audience as a threat to public health can be seen as part of this contemporary discourse, which is she has talked about bazaar as the site of unsanitary practices, social deviance, and moral decay, a place against which one needs protection, which is a quote from Chakrabarti again. Why do I think this is an important site of authorial voice? Right, what she is doing is she's bringing her primary material, but she is having another author's perspective or another author actually comment upon her primary material. Right, again, remember, this is a choice that she is making. Dipesh Chakrabarti has not read Dorabji's work, neither has commented upon it. It is the author who is enabling for the reader, or she is enabling Dipesh Chakrabarti's insights to bear upon the primary data that we have seen, which is Dorabji's depiction. And that, I think, is a very important, again, authorial move that you make, where your voice becomes evident. Right, now, these are also things which, these are, I'm sure you all have made these kind of authorial moves, these gestures of writing you have also used. What we are also doing in this is to really read the authorial voice in these gestures, which we otherwise don't tend to, because we have a certain sort of unquestioned understanding of voice only as my perspective and where do I bring in my opinion and my ideas, right? But what I'm saying through this entire exercise is for us to destabilize or also break down those understandings, or what is my idea and what is my perspective and what is that my sort of contribution to it. In many little ways, these are the ways in which you are actually sort of crafting this argument, you are crafting this narrative. And that's why I think you are actually, the authorial voice is present in these very small ways, in these authorial gestures that you do, right? So that is, I think, more important part. So in many ways, I think what I am presenting to you here is not like these ways in which you sort of make your voice manifest, but actually for all of you to go back to your writing and kind of reclaim places where you actually, your voice is present, but which you might not recognize as your voice, right? Or of course, in some other places, take these conscious decisions where then you take charge of literature, take charge of your material in certain ways, which gives you the agency, which then makes us see the author's voice in their writing, right? So that is really, I would say, the larger sort of the meta message that I do want to give through reading these, that how do we really read the author's voice, because it is present. It's simply that we only recognize certain ways of articulation as the author's voice, but there are several actually ways in which the author is present. I'm not going to go into this because I know everybody is very tired. We have done some really hard work and looked at this material so much that, I can totally imagine everybody going cross-eyed. So I'm not going to push this, but I just will definitely, I will email this particular handout to you. It's incidentally, it's the same sort of passage again, which Shivani had also used about Khagendranath Mittal, and then what Miriam Hansen had to say about this. But I chose this particular passage for us for the similar reason. I do want you to go back to this passage and try and see where you can, how can you excavate the author's voice in this, right? At the first glance, this is really like a straightforward. She's taking primary material, she's using evidence from, or citations and references to interpret this. But then where here in this is the site where you can see the author's voice. Where does she bring in different kind of scholarship to bear upon the analysis of her primary material, and in what are the ways in which she does that? So I do want you to go back to this and as an exercise, but more importantly, I think it will be good if you can revisit your own writing, and actually see where can you recover your voice in it, because I think that voice is there. It might not be there in I. It might be there. Of course, you might have had to use one things, and this paper elaborates upon, and this thesis elaborates upon. But the point of this whole exercise being that there will be many other places where you're present, and how do we recover those places and strengthen them as well in very conscious ways. So that was really the broader objective of this exercise. I thought I would have a writing exercise to do, but I'm glad I don't, because I think we have really sort of pushed you all a lot, and I'm sure that's been very exhausting. So I'm actually going to stop this and see if you have any other questions or comments.
Just one thing, Madhura. The point about adjectives, using adjectives to qualify how you feel about your subject matter, etc. I think again that kind of space is usually not encouraged if, in our part of the world, and I mean,
Yes,
even if you write succinctly, and that's not encouraged. That why are you writing these adjectives? These are not required. So those things get edited out in the process of finalizing the draft. So that space again is not there
right.
in Indian academia. So
Yeah, no, I completely acknowledge and understand that, and I can totally see the frustration that comes from there. Yeah. Again, what I would say is, of course, very easy for me to say from here, but what I would say is, I building upon what Shivani also said, that the once you start publishing, that is, a slightly, definitely the room does increase for you to use succinctly, for instance, or to say in their brilliant exposition of this. And I
right, I
remember,
mean,
I wouldn't dare to say something like brilliant. Like, I think somebody is brilliant, and can I actually say that in
no,
my
you can't. In a
in a
thesis, you
title,
can't
right?
probably.
Yes, you
Because
can't.
I'd written that and it got edited out a lot of times and a lot of places. One got scolded for it so many times. But
Right.
yeah, that
Right,
is
but yeah, I think that's precisely, yeah, where hopefully once you start writing for publishing in journals, these would be, those spaces are open there, and for you to then, I would say, to keep a watch out for those spaces. Of course, I'm sure it also becomes harder to push it, where you are scared that, okay, if I write this, this is going to get edited out. So I know that one does a kind of self censorship and says, okay, let me write this in very boring
after a few times you
style.
already self censor.
Yeah, let me write this in a sterile, boring kind of way, right? So, but that's what I'm saying, with at least with those of you who might be writing for, like, in a journal article, I think those spaces can be pushed against. I mean, I'm really sort of, yeah, I hear you. It's really frustrating to hear that it is from these things get edited out, and that's where then really the sense of I becomes important, where you want to fight to use that I. And I think it is a very valid fight, because you are really fighting for you to be in your writing, right? At a very basic level. So
Can
yeah.
I just come in here? I think this will make sense in an English department because forget I. In my PhD, I'd extensively used Vikram Seth's Suitable Boy in one of the chapters because I'm sure you've all read it. So he has this elaborate descriptions of a tannery, and one of the characters is like this upper caste man who works in a tannery, which was kind of the point of my thesis. So I thought, oh, well, Seth has done my ethnography for me. Let me actually use some bits of his work to illustrate what I'm saying. But I was told this is literature, okay, and shouldn't be in a political science dissertation, because what if it goes to a like a conventional political science examiner and they get annoyed. So I was told, keep the literature out, you can bring it back, when you write your book. So I am now actually writing for that. Like, so now I'm going to bring back Vikram Seth with a great vengeance whenever the book happens, because it's just waiting to be included. So not just I actually,
Yeah.
but just another discipline, right? Another disciplinary text is also very difficult to get in. So,
Yeah.
I mean, those boundaries are there for sure,
You
but
for
there
that
are
matter,
also.
I mean, for literary studies, even to include a lot of cultural studies
Hmm.
would be too much. Like to an extent, it's allowed. Beyond that, oh no, no, no. So
Yeah.
But I still feel, Shabi, we still are, I mean, in much privileged position as compared to Dr. Kapoor, because we are in a department that is accepting of a lot
yeah,
of
that encourages a lot
interdisciplinary.
of
Yes,
interdisciplinarity.
so a lot of people, a lot of us are actually working on cultural spaces, and we might not even have literary text. Like I'm working on video games, I don't have literary text as such. So
Yeah.
that actually, I mean, we are in a much more happy
Misfits.
place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had conducted a workshop with PhD students in sociology once, in which I got this stunning question saying, "Can we write this in our own words?" Right, at the PhD level. So it is very tragic to see the kind of erasure of the self, right? That of the scholarly self that happens in. Under the garb of this has to be academic and objective research, right? And so yeah, that is really like it was a different level of, can we please write it in our, can we, is it okay to write it in our own words, right? So yeah, I think we are, I mean, yeah, it would be important to recognize that these are very strongly related to disciplinary trajectories in specific contexts, right? So yeah, I mean, I hope though that little by little we can push against those boundaries for sure. Absolutely. I know, Shivani, you were telling, and I think that's the case in DU, JNU also, or a host of other universities. You have to give your title of your thesis, and it can't be changed later, right? So for a lot of social scientists, it's quite like difficult, right? What if you go to the field and something entirely new comes up? And here is a university which imagines that you can predict your research right at the time of proposal
And for that
submission.
matter, before you are admitted to that course, you are supposed to give a synopsis of something
Hmm.
that you have not done.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So, I mean, even if it is prospective, how do you even visualize it before having read all the primary text, at least,
Yes, yes.
let alone secondary text?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I mean, so this question of resistance to the I also has to be located in this larger discourse that exists about overall the project of knowledge making, in our context as well. Whether it is like a certain hangover of the positivist kind of a thing, but it has to be located within that. Yeah. But I really hope that we will be able to more and more push against it. The very fact that I think, Shivani, you were able to do the kind of work that you did, despite despite the kind of resistance that I'm sure you had to face, right? And incredulity that people expressed is like
No, I had done an MPhil on autobiographies, so they had slated me as literature in the MPhil. Then in the PhD, I think they gave up. They said she will not do pol science. I mean, she'll do sociology, literature, everything. So yeah, if you keep doing it, it becomes easier.
No, one of my friends who's in law, and she wanted to do something related with law, culture studies, and literary studies. She was rejected at the IITs also. So, no, no, this is not us, humanities and social sciences. We don't do this here. You go to some other department for this. I won't do this. So, I mean, even the IITs, where else do we go?
I think Jamia is a little forgiving. I'm
Yeah.
doing my work on Urdu literature. Urdu literature department people are appalled. Like, how did they allow you? Why are you doing this? How are you managing? So, but I have a question for Madhura. Madhura, my question is a little related to Aditi's question, who was earlier talking about how, like, while doing research, while through your research, you realize that somebody else is doing or saying exactly the same thing that you are thinking and doing and researching on. I think the kind of problem I'm facing is that I'm feeling rather isolated in my field. That the problem is that there is not enough material. I wish I could, and I think it has given me a lot of hope. Also, Manishita's thesis statement, which is totally hinged on Bhaba's earlier statement, which she has sort of put, the nation community into the cinema going community. Because I was feeling like there is not enough literature already written on my topic that I can base my study. So I'm having a hard time quoting other people. I don't have enough quotes. So that's like another kind of problem where you are sort of just hanging in air, so almost like, you really don't know how to hinge yourself like in the existing literature because there is not a lot existing.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think if you could talk a little bit about that.
Um, well, I mean, I don't know if I'll be able to give you like super helpful things, but what I can think of, if you are in a place where there isn't, let's say, for instance, you're saying that in that context there isn't much work being done. I'm sure, I mean, there would be, of course, one way is to look at diverse contexts in which maybe popular literature has been looked at, of course, while maintaining very clearly that you are not using it with, you're using this fully knowing that it can't simply be translated from one context to the other. But in the absence of any other material available, this is one thing that you can fall back upon to look at what has happened or what kind of work has been done in popular literature in other contexts. So that could be, of course, and that has its limits because precisely because you can't apply you can't easily change across contexts. But I'm sure that there would be certain bits of insights that might be relevant also in the process of writing itself. Some of it might also sort of make themselves might emerge in the process of writing. But I think that that could be one, of course, that's one way with, and the important thing is to front your the acknowledgement that that this is not easily, you can't simply take material from this context and apply it here, but in the absence of anything else, this is what you're relying on. I think that is, again, that is precisely, again, you are making explicit the conditions under which that knowledge is produced, right? Where that clearly is your sort of the
I
awareness.
sort of pitched it as interdisciplinary right at the beginning because I have to borrow from, because there is not enough literature on it. So I'm using history and
Yeah,
sociology and stuff like that, so that I have something to sort of build it on, because otherwise I'd be really
absolutely. And
lost.
you're
So
and
Also, I think Anab and Sudipta both. I mean, I understand that during the PhD level stage, it's very scary at times if you don't have too much to cite and fall back on. But do take it as an opportunity to also front your
yeah,
argument and
absolutely.
say that there isn't material on
Yeah,
this, right? Because the absence is also an argument. The fact that you don't have material on this or archive on this is also an argument you are making. B, this is the chance for you to showcase your work
yeah,
and to say that you're doing something which hasn't been done before, and thus There may be gaps in literature, there may be gaps in methodology, but to the best of
Yeah.
your knowledge, there isn't much. So it's also an opportunity for you to foreground your work and
Mm.
say it in. I mean, bringing your voice in that sense that you're
Yeah,
pointing to a gap or an absence.
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
had to cut short a chapter because of that, because
Yeah,
of the paucity of work.
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I get it. I get it.
Because sometimes I feel like either I'm a genius that I'm taking up this topic and completely revolutionary, or this topic is so irrelevant that nobody has ever done it and I'm stupid for doing it. So I'm just sort of pendulating between these two end of the spectrum.
No,
Either
no,
this is
it's
going to be
common.
really really good or this is going to be really really
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But good for you. If there are those moments when you think this is I'm a genius and oh my lord, nobody, good for you. Hold on to that because there are very few moments when academics think,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, most of the time we are like
we
duffers.
tend to think
What are we
like that
doing?
about our work. At least in our when we are still working on our PhDs and all that kind of high self-esteem is hard to come by. So hold on to
Oh,
that. But if you have any other comments or, I mean, yeah, anything else, happy to.
Also, Madhura, we haven't made it yet, but I think we will send a feedback form, right?
Yes, yes, yes. That would be very, very useful for us. Because, yeah, because many of the times, these are all very interactions where we don't, like, we meet you, and then after that, there is no, it's not necessary that we meet you again. So there is really no way for us to know whether this worked, in what ways it did, or in what ways it didn't, what were some of the other concerns. So yes, please do, Shabi. We can send you the.
definitely, definitely. I think, and these conversations that we are having now proves that the entire day was so fruitful for all of us, and it made us think and rework our methodology, how we work already. So this is absolutely, it has been a wonderful day for us.
Thank you.
I'm
And
glad.
I mean, do stay in touch. I mean, in spite
Yes.
of the feedback form. I mean.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely,
and
absolutely.
I think, shall we go
I,
ahead with a formal close, or
I
Faizan, you say
yeah,
something?
yeah. I was. I mean, Shivani ma'am. I was waiting for your feedback on.
I will give it. I'll give it. Let me just sort of have a cup of tea,
Okay. All
uh,
right.
look at something else for a while, but I will come back to that document and give the feedback.
So how will you share that? I mean, will you be mailing us?
So since you all have the link and it's a Google Doc, you can access it anytime.
Okay.
So I think if you check, let's say check tomorrow, maybe I'm sure I'll be able to look at it by then.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
The link might not be available after the meeting ends. So, Faizan, it would be good if you can share, save it,
Open it.
or maybe we
Open it.
can circulate it on the
Yeah,
mailing
and
list or
just keep it
something.
copied.
Okay. Thanks, Aparna. Did.
Aparna, can we have the vote of thanks?
Yes, 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 sure.
Please go ahead.
Are we finishing then? Okay.
Huh?
Finally, I mean, are we finishing? I mean, we are finishing 15 minutes
Yes,
early, so okay. So
sadly.
fine, I would like to give a formal vote of thanks. So good evening, everyone. It has been such an enriching experience attending this workshop by Dr. Madhura Lohokare and Dr. Shivani Kapoor. On behalf of the Department of English and the organizing team, I would like to thank everyone who made today's event successful. First and foremost, a huge thank you to our resource persons who have honed our skills and understanding of academic writing. I must say it has truly been enlightening. Thank you for your time. We are indeed grateful to you. I would like to thank our HOD, Professor Simi Malhotra, who has always been a lending hand and helped us coordinate the event so well. I thank our participants for being so enthusiastic throughout the workshop. Thank you to Shabi Rahat and Sudipta Agarwal, my co-hosts, who very kindly helped with today's event and have truly been a great support. I would also like to thank our office staff for this assistance throughout. And thank you everyone for joining. We look forward to more such academic writing workshops in the future, and we look forward to engaging with Dr. Kapoor and Dr. Lohokare otherwise as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sticking on for the whole day. Not easy on a Saturday. And Shabi and Professor Malhotra had said that all of you also, most of you are teaching elsewhere. So this is really, really appreciate the sort of the battery of readings that we took you through but in the online mode. So yes, and I really hope we keep in touch and we hope to see you some point again for sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I think I can say this for Madhura also that we had great fun.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's always a pleasure to meet PhD students and talk to them. We usually engage with undergrads, and things are a little more difficult and slow. And if you're teaching, then you know what we are talking about. So it's always a pleasure to sort of talk to adults like us. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you,
so much.
everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye bye.